Well, pardon me, good afternoon. It's 4:30 here in Cincinnati, and we're ready to go, conclude our lecture series for Business 101 Introduction to Business tonight with the three of the four bonus chapters. Bonus Chapter A, Working Within the Legal Environment, Bonus Chapter C, Managing Risk, and then Bonus Chapter D, Managing Personal Finances. These are rather short chapters. And again, there is no requirement for summaries for these chapters. We'll probably spend between about an hour and a half and 2 hours total going through this tonight. And I hope this will be beneficial to you. I find these to be interesting chapters that kind of embellish, if you will, and flesh out some of the concepts that we've already talked about in the course. And I think it give you some additional pointers. Learning goals for this chapter are define business law and then distinguish between statutory and common law and explain the role of administrative agencies. Define tort law and explain the role of product liability in tort law, something we always have to be concerned with. Identify the purposes and conditions of patents, copyrights, and trademarks, all various things that are very important to businesses to protect. And when I get there, I'll give you a little bit of information that you may or may not know what's going on today about, specifically about patents. Describe warranties and negotiable instruments as covered in the Uniform Commercial Code. List and describe the conditions necessary to make a legally enforceable contract, and then describe the possible consequences if such a contract is violated. Summarize several laws that regulate the competition and protect consumers in the United States. Explain the role of tax laws in generating income for the government and as a method of discouraging and or encouraging, if you will, certain behaviors among taxpayers. Distinguish among the various types of bankruptcy as outlined by the Bankruptcy Code. Important, there have been some changes in that. We're only going to give you a cursory glance. So if for some reason you have to pursue this, please make sure that you get legal assistance. And then explain the role of deregulation as a tool to encourage competition. This slide, simply tells us that we need to have laws. Laws are part of civilized behavior, and it not only says civilized behavior, civilized societies, but it encourages civilized behavior. Of course, not always, but most people follow them. But as the slide says, any law needs to keep abreast of the times and the changes in society and changes in culture. We're specifically, specifically speaking about laws here. We have, as you know, in the United States, three branches of government: administrative branch, which is the President of the United States, or governors or mayors, and then the President's cabinet and administrative positions that he is allowed to appoint people to. The same would be true for governors and for mayors. And then we have legislative branch, which is the United States Congress, or the legislatures of the various states. In cities and counties, it would be city commissions or city councils or county commissions. And then we have the judiciary, which the United States is made up of the federal judiciary, which would be the Supreme Court, the 12 circuit courts, and then the various district courts within the United States. I don't know the number of district courts, so you'll have to give me a break on that one. I don't have any idea. And then states have various and sundry things. States have criminal courts, they have civil courts, they have obviously Supreme Courts, they have appellate courts, and then there's some other courts, depending upon the state you live in. The model pretty much for each state follows what the federal model is. but there are some variations, some differences. These are the types of courts that we have. Trial courts, as the slide says, here are either criminal cases, which are felonies, or they hear civil cases. Civil cases can be a number of things. Civil cases also are also considered divorces and child custody and things like that, which normally do not have a jury. Now, you know, the system that we have, we follow the English system in this country, is that each individual who is accused of a crime or who is brought to court for a civil type trial is, as long as it's to be tried by a jury, is to be tried by a jury of his or her peers. Most of the time, it probably does not happen. There are people who are in a jury pool, their names are picked out at random, and they serve. For instance, in my family, my immediate family, and my grandparents, I include that side. My grandfather was a county judge in Kentucky for a long number of years, and certainly after his death, his wife, my grandmother, was called to jury duty. Other than that, and a younger brother who was called to jury duty but was excused because he was in the Navy at the time and was stationed in San Diego. Nobody in my family has ever been called to jury duty. So and yet a young woman who worked for me in a previous life that I had, employment that I had, was called to jury duty at least twice within 18 months. So it's difficult to figure that out. And then, of course, it talks here about appellate courts. They hear appeals from the courts below them. They don't have to hear the appeals. They can reject the appeals, and it goes back to the court. Now, what usually happens here is when an appellate court, especially at the federal level, declines to hear a case, that really means that the district court's decision is affirmed. Now, sometimes when that doesn't happen in the federal courts, they'll go to somebody who wants to appeal will go to the Supreme Court, bypassing the federal court. Usually speaking, if a circuit court of appeals in the federal judicial system has declined to hear a case, the Supreme Court follows suit. There are times when the Supreme Court does not do that, but for the most part, it will affirm what the lower court has done. Interesting to note that the Supreme Court is in session for 9 months a year, and it probably only hears about 150 cases. So there are numerous appeals that come to the Supreme Court and decline. How the Supreme Court hears a case is when an appeal is sent to the Supreme Court. If 4 of the 9 justices vote to hear the case, then the case will be scheduled on the Supreme Court's docket. Types of law here, we have criminal law. That's when somebody has committed a felony. And that usually comes to court after there's been some investigation. Sometimes there's a grand jury investigation and they find probable cause, which means the case will be heard by a jury. Civil law is non-criminal cases, exactly as it says here. And they do things that, just as mentioned, I'm not going to read it, but certainly divorce and personal injury and things of that nature. Now, there is a law in the United States. It's part of the Constitution, part of the Bill of Rights. It says a person cannot be tried twice for the same crime, and that is true. However, and I want to give you this however so that you know it, and I use the O.J. Simpson case as an example. O.J. Simpson was tried in criminal court and found innocent. However, the parents of his murdered wife filed suit in civil court, and he did appear in civil court, and he was convicted. Now, what is the difference here? The difference is that even though it was technically the same crime he was tried on something different. And the difference between civil court and criminal court is this. In criminal court, an individual must be convicted beyond a shadow of a doubt. In civil court, it's the preponderance of the evidence. So it does not follow the same exact regulation, same standards in civil court. And then we have what is known as business law, which talks about the regulations that businesses follow. And they do follow this for conduct of law. Now, the Uniform Commercial Code, which we'll get to later, is used in all 50 states in the Union with the exception of Louisiana. Three things here: statutory law, common law, and precedent. Statutory law is what is written into law by the United States. It's part of the Constitution or part of the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and there have been amendments since then. It is law written by the United States itself, enacted by the United States Congress and signed by the President, or in the states, enacted by states and signed by the respective governors. That is what is known as statutory law. That is written into law. So if you want to go look that up someplace, you could find it. Common law is something that follows decisions that have been handed down by jurists, judges, over a period of time and have been accepted as law, but you will not find them written in statutes. For instance, many years and maybe centuries is a better word to use here, in England or in English law, people would cite Blackstone, who was a famous lawyer. And Blackstone did this, or Blackstone said that, or Blackstone acted in a certain way, and we accepted what Blackstone did, and we continue that. So that's common law. And then precedent is kind of like what I said here in a way, because judges use cases that have been decided before them to adjudicate things that are before them now. And I'll give you two examples here of cases that were law. Well, one was law in the United States for many years, Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson was decided by the United States Supreme Court in 1896, and it affirmed the odious practice of separate but equal. What this meant was that, and mostly applied to southern states, but you could find it in other states as well, it just wasn't as open, I suppose is the best way to say it, as it was in southern states. And what that simply said was that the state could create two systems, one for blacks and one for whites, and they were separate but equal. But the fact of the matter is they were separate but unequal. That was Plessy versus Ferguson. I won't get you into that, but I would suggest that you use Google or another search engine and read about that, because it was a case that was kind of foisted on the judiciary in Louisiana, eventually worked its way to the Supreme Court. In 1954, in Brown versus the Board of Education, the Supreme Court repudiated the Plessy decision. And it said separate but equal was no longer the law of the land anywhere. Now, unfortunately, that was 1954, 60 years ago, and hopefully we've moved beyond that. Unfortunately, we haven't. I'm not talking about separate but equal today, but we find many cases of segregation by geography. And it probably has maybe, by the way, this is me speaking, not anybody else. It has gotten us probably more segregated in some respects than we were before Plessy versus Ferguson, and certainly 10 years before the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Administrative agencies, some mentioned here for you, the Federal Reserve, which we talked about, as you remember, a week ago. Talked also here about the Securities and Exchange Commission, which we've also talked about, Equal Opportunity Federal Trade Commission. In some respects, these are agencies that are set up by the federal government, and the Congress of the United States has given them power to act in the name of Congress. And I point this out to you because often we will hear people fussing about unelected officials making rules and policies and procedures and setting standards, etc. Well, that's true. But we have to remember that the Congress of the United States has given these folks the authority to do that. We have 535 members of Congress, 435 in the House of Representatives, and 100 in the United States Senate. They don't have the time or the resources to do the administrative roles that are performing administrative roles that these agencies do. And therefore, they've devolved that responsibility to these folks. So we have to be careful when we hear about unelected officials making rules and regulations and policies and setting standards, etc. Congress has given them the authority to do that. Now, of course, Congress can take that away and has tried to do that. Has been successful in some cases, not successful in others. The next thing we come to is tort law. A tort is a wrongful act that causes injury or harm to another person's body, its person, or to his or her property. Also, it goes one step further to reputation. Now, reputation is difficult here because it is difficult to prove in a court of law that some person's reputation was injured due to slander or something else. These cases do come up quite frequently. We do see them. What happens a lot of times is we run into our world famous First Amendment to the Constitution, the protection of free speech. And so it's very difficult to figure out sometimes what this reputation is, usually in the form of slander. It has happened. Courts have ruled that way. Courts have ruled just the other way as well. An intentional tort's what it says. I don't have to read that for you. I don't have to explain it. Intentional is intentional. Somebody intends to do you harm. There's no question about that. Now, negligence is something else. People can be sued for negligence. But that is something that causes, look at the word there, unintentional harm or injury, but people can still be held liable for that. I guess the classic example would be an automobile accident where the driver was clearly within his or her faculties. And for some reason, I'm not going to try to speculate on this, caused an accident that caused harm or injury to someone else in another vehicle, a bystander, pardon me, or something else. Now, that's unintentional, but he or she is still liable for that act because they were in control of the automobile at the time that it happened. Product liability law is exactly what it says. This holds a business accountable for the product and the production and the distribution of products that are made in error. That's the term I'm going to use. What I mean by error is faulty production, use of bad parts, etc., etc. Also notice it talks about inadequate warnings. You may remember the case of scalding coffee with McDonald's. Now, that case has been battered around back and forth several different times. An elderly woman opened a cup of coffee that she got from McDonald's. I think she was either in a passenger automobile or driving an automobile. We can question whether she should have opened it or not, but she did, and she spilled it and caused severe burns. And she claimed that McDonald's did not put a warning on there large enough for her to read, that it was caution harmful when hot, or something, a hot liquid or something of that nature. But that's what we're talking about here. Now, strict product liability, notice, is liability without regard to fault. Now, what it goes on to say is the company who is liable here is liable for the product, defective product, even if they didn't know about it or it was not detected. So that's strict liability law, product liability law. Here's major cases. Probably the most famous one, and when I was in graduate school, we studied, is the Ford Pinto case, which was a case in business ethics, which was decided in 1978. Award after Boyd was severely burned, $125 million in damage. What was particularly galling about this case is that Ford knew about the defective part around the trunk of not the trunk, the gas tank. And they also knew that there was like an O-ring gasket that could be fitted there, and it would ameliorate this explosion upon impact issue. It seems to me, as I remember, that O-ring gasket, and by the way, I might not be 100% correct, but something of that nature, would have cost on the order of $6. And Ford would have had to recall all the Pintos and had that replaced in there. And Ford did what is commonly known as a cost-benefit analysis and decided that it was better for them to pay out any kind of damages that came up, or it was less expensive for them than to recall these cars and fit this part on, etc. Now, we can debate the ethics of that for forever, but that's what they did. There's some other ones in here that you can look at. Of course, General Motors, as you know, has one now about accelerators, and there have been, I think, 13 deaths attributed to that. Those cases are still working their way through the courts of what's going to be done about it. General Motors has set aside a good deal of money for that. The problems that we run into here, and these are ethical issues, they're not just legal issues. The ethical issues seem to be that in the Ford case, as I mentioned, and in the GM case, both the companies knew about these faulty parts, or what could have been done to preclude an explosion in Ford's case, and they didn't do anything. Now, the current GM, Mary Barra, I think. By the way, she's profiled here in the text. I don't remember what chapter, but she said she didn't know anything about it. She was a senior vice president at GM at the time. But what seems to have happened here, and this is a case of accountability, responsibility, etc. I know I'm getting a little bit off the law, but we're talking about ethics, which is very important here. And that is that there were people at GM that did know about it, but they did not do the things they were required to do, report it to people who could have fixed the issue. So we have not only a legal issue, we also have an ethical issue. And remember, as we've talked about, following the law doesn't mean the action is legal. Patents, copyrights, and trademarks. Patent is somebody that gives a inventor the rights to that product, can't be duplicated, copied, etc. for 20 years. After 20 years, the patent is no longer valid, and the only way the inventor could keep that patent or keep a portion of that patent would be to do something to change what he or she had done at the beginning to make it new. So it would be a new patent. It wouldn't be the old one being continued, but it would be something fit on top of that. So, and companies want to do that. What I said I was going to mention something. There are companies around today, by the way, they're unethical companies, I want to say this, that do what is known as patent trolling. And they will find some nebulous patent out somewhere, and they will contact the company that's making the patent. And by the way, they'll buy these patents up. And then they'll contact companies making a product and say, we own the patent, and you're infringing upon our patent. And if you don't cease and desist, we're going to sue you and take you to court and a few other things. What those people are doing is really, I can't say it's illegal, but I can say it's unethical. A copyright is similar to a patent, except it doesn't have an expiration. And it protects creators' rights. We're talking here about intellectual property. Would be something like books and records and recordings and stage productions and things of that nature. And it goes on here, talks about even cartoons. And then a trademark is similar to a copyright, except it's like a symbol. And it allows people to use that so they're identified with it. Coca-Cola is a trademark. Coca-Cola is actually Coke is a trademark, and that's a symbol. Protected name is also in there that they use and can get after people who do that. Now, these are patent figures and facts here, which I'm really not going to go over a whole lot, except the first bullet. And that is, pardon me, if you have an invention or you think you have an invention, the best thing for you to do is to contact a person who is a patent attorney. Do not go to your family lawyer. He probably doesn't know, or she probably doesn't know enough about patents to be conversant. Now, that's not to denigrate your family attorney, but if he or she's in general practice, they probably don't know enough about patent law. So try to find somebody who is conversant with that. You can go to the Legal Aid Society in your local community, and they can put you in contact with somebody. Is it going to be expensive? Yes, it is. I'm not going to dismiss that. But if you're interested and you've got something you think it's patentable, to use a word, contact that person. He can get you, or she can get you through what you need to do. Now, once the person has a patent, he or she is free to do with that whatever they want. They can go into production. They can sell it to somebody else. They can license to somebody else to make the product. There's all kinds of things that they can do for 20 years. Now, by the way, copyright goes a little bit more than that. The normal copyright law, I didn't get to that. I didn't think about it. The normal copyright law says that the owner of the copyright has that for 50 years. And then after that period of time, it devolves to his or her heirs. Sometimes it goes to the publisher, depending upon what it happens to be. So copyright is a little bit different. You kind of have to check on that to see what that is. But if you have a copyright for something on a book, piece of intellectual property, it's yours, and usually it's for 50 years. These are just patent leaders in the year 2010, which I'm not going to spend any time on. Uniform Commercial Code that I alluded to a little earlier. Notice it says it's comprehensive commercial law, and it covers things like sales and contracts and all sorts of things in that nature. It has 11 articles, and it covers a wide range of business things. Warranties are something that we always know about and we hear about, and it's kind of a guarantee, if you will, that the product will work as advertised. And there's two kinds. There's an express warranty and there's an applied warranty. Express warranty is one that is told to you by the manufacturer, or sometimes the seller, and regarding the goods and services that it's offering. Implied is something that's legally imposed, because the seller implies that a product will conform to the standards of trade, and that comes from the Uniform Code of Uniform Commercial Code, excuse me. Negotiable instruments. That is something that is a contract, if you will, between the maker and the holder. And notice it's commercial paper, and it can be transferred among businesses and individuals. Now, it has 4 conditions. It must be written and signed by the person who makes this negotiable instrument. It has to be payable on demand at a specified date. It is payable to the person who holds the negotiable paper or instrument. You're going to use paper here sort of interchangeably. Now notice I said who holds it. I didn't say to whom it was originally intended. And then contains unconditional promise to pay whatever it says it's supposed to pay. Then we have contract law. Contract is a legally enforceable document between 2 parties. And then contract law is what specifies the legality. Breach of contract is when one of the parties wants to get out of the contract or whatever, and that is not part of the contract itself. To use the term walks away from the contract. So in other words, not going to back the contract up. Now here is what makes a contract legal and binding. There is an offer made and it's accepted. And notice the acceptance is voluntary. So if somebody made a contract with you and then held a gun to your head and said, sign this under pain of death, or sign this or I'll pull the trigger, that is not a contract because it would be made under duress. Both parties give consideration. Each party is competent. In other words, he or she is able to make the contract. I'm competent here. And they would have to be in most states at least 18 years of age. Even though we could say a person is competent at 17, most state laws say it's 18. A legal act. Somebody wants to sell you drugs and you make a contract to buy the drugs outside of a pharmacy or some other place like that. It's illegal because they're asking you to buy something that's contraband, which is illegal. And then the contract's in the proper form. Now, all that simply means is it's made by the maker. He or she writes out what it is. He or she signs it, and then the person I'm making a contract with signs it. It does not have to be witnessed, does not have to be certified by a notary public, doesn't have to go through a lawyer, etc. But all of these 6 steps have to be, or requirements have to be followed. Breach of contract, usually these things go to court. And contract can be breached but the breach of contract usually goes to court to find out who's going to pay. Notice I want to read these here. It has to be specific performance. There has to be payment of damages, and then there has to be discharge of the obligation if the contract is breached. And this usually comes from the legal folks. The Clayton Act of 1914, it gets into anti-competitive practices. It eliminates exclusive dealing, tying of contracts to certain things, and then interlocking directorates. There were directorates years ago, and they would interlock. And many times they weren't in the same business, but they were in adjacent businesses, if you will. And it really was stifling to competition. Antitrust legislation, the Clayton Act kind of was part of that. Federal Trade Commission came into being in 1914, and it's, precludes unfair competition among anything else. We then had the Wheeler-Lee Act amendment of 1938, which gave the FTC additional authority to investigate false and misleading ads. And then the Robinson Patman Act of 1936 prohibits price discrimination, and that applies to both buyers and sellers. These are just a history of high-profile antitrust cases in the United States. I'm not going to go into those. It is something to look at. Standard Oil, of course, which was owned by the Rockefellers, is high there. And you can see this, by the way, in figure A3 on page A11. Consumerism, as you know, has become a big issue in the United States, and it's a movement that seeks to increase and strengthen the rights of us, the buyers, the consumers. And then we have what precipitated this was the collapse of the real estate market and the crash that we had on Wall Street, and it began in late 2007. So a lot of problems. The Dodd-Frank Act, the Reform Act is there, which Wall Street is actively working to water down. What's the problem with that? Well, we don't ever seem to learn lessons. There are people in the United States on one side of the political spectrum that say we have too many regulations. There are people on the other side of the United States on the other end of the political spectrum who say we don't have enough. There has to be a happy medium someplace, but when we have these two poles actually not pulling apart, but pushing against each other in a way to cause the gulf to be further apart, we have problems. And it seems like we don't ever learn our lesson, and we have to go back and repeat it again, and then we get more problems. Dodd-Frank created a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which we do have, which is up and running, which is opposed by a large percentage of politicians that we elect to Congress and the Senate. This is identity theft, and I'm not going to get into that. These are the types of taxes we pay: personal tax, income tax, property tax, sales and excise taxes, etc. Sin taxes, what people pay for a pack of cigarettes. By the way, that's probably not going to go away since we have the advent of e-cigarettes. Talking about how much money the rich pay on taxes, again, that's something I want to go into. Bankruptcy law is set up to protect people who, through no fault of their own, and I want to say that very clearly, no fault of their own, find out that they are indebted. Medical bills have become a big issue with personal indebtedness in the United States. And they go through bankruptcy court and are relieved of those debts by the court, but there's a payback system that's set in place. Chapter 7 is a bankruptcy that you or I would file. Chapter 11 is reorganization, which protects the business from its creditors while they're reorganizing, but doesn't protect them from not paying. Just protects them from while they're reorganizing. And then the repayment plan is exactly what it says. Chapter 7, this talks about how claims are paid. Unsecured claims are paid in this order. I'm really not going to go through that, but it gives you some idea of how these come about and how people are held accountable. And then how assets are divided in bankruptcy. And we can see this on page A16, figure A6, A6, and it talks about the flow. And again, it's not something I want to go through, but it's something I suggest that you look at so you can become at least familiar with it. These are companies that have gone out of business. Again, not something I'm going to spend any time with. Deregulating commerce, the object here is that we can get greater competition, and people who cannot stay in business will go out of business, and they're getting rid of the weak to have the strong remain. I can't say that that has been friendly, especially the airline industry, to consumers. Telecommunication probably has been in some respects. Public utilities, that's not gone through very well. They've tried to do some deregulation there, but it just hasn't taken well at all. And then finally, this is a hamburger regulation. You can see this at figure A7 on page A18. Yeah, page A18 in the text. I'm not going to go through it, but the object here is talking about the different regulations that are required of business. Obviously, this is fast food. Well, we're at 5:11, almost 5:12. So let's take a break till 5:17. We'll come back, and we probably only have about another hour to discuss here tonight, maybe a little bit less. We won't hold you up. If we get through chapter bonus chapter C relatively quickly, then we'll go right on to bonus chapter D. So please come back at 5:17. Thank you. It's 5:17. We're back. We're now going to talk about bonus chapter C, managing risk. Remember, we talked a little bit about risk in chapter 1. We talked a little bit about risk in chapters 5 and 6, risk of starting your own business, risk of becoming an entrepreneur, et cetera, et cetera. But we really didn't talk about in depth what we mean about risk and how to manage risk. Something that's really very difficult to, well, not difficult to think about, but we have to think about. We know risk is going to happen. We know the risk is around. We step off a curb and we're risking that the traffic is going to pay attention to the stop signs or the traffic signals or whatever it happens to be. So we need to think about how we can manage risk so we can be successful. Our learning goals for this chapter are to identify environmental changes that have made risk management important, explain the 4 ways of managing risk, and distinguish between insurable and uninsurable risk. Very important. Define insurance policies and explain the law of large numbers and the rule of indemnity. Pardon me. Pardon me. And then finally, by the way, you would think I smoke a lot. I don't. I just have a chronic cough due to a lung condition that I have. Discuss the various types of insurance businesses can buy. Discuss the various types of insurance businesses can buy to manage risk. Excuse me. Well, I did get down there too. Goals of enterprise risk management. This is defining the risks that are manageable and the type of risk management we have, the technologies and investments that are required, and how risk management efforts, if you will be coordinated across the firm. So what is risk? I think that's something we have to ask. I think that's something we know, but there is sort of a definition here. It is the chance of loss. And notice what's in there. It's an odds type thing. It's the degree of probability that loss will occur. And then we have to look at what the possible cost is going to be. Speculative risk, that's something where we're going to flip a coin in the air and decide whether or not we're going to be able to make a lot of money or lose a lot of money. And then pure risk is just simply getting into something and there is no chance at all of being successful, no chance of making a profit. We're going to lose no matter what we do. And it's that type of risk which we have to be able to identify very quickly and walk away from. Speculative risk, that's what entrepreneurs get into all the time. They're speculating that their idea is going to be successful and they're going to earn some profit out, maybe be able to sell them what they've done to somebody else and move on to the next thing. We need to do several things here, maybe all of them, maybe only one of them. We need to reduce the risk. Now, how do we reduce risk? Well, if we're a homeowner or an apartment dweller and we walk out of that premises, we lock the doors. We close and lock the windows. So we're trying to reduce the risk of somebody entering the house. Now, it doesn't mean to say that somebody won't, but now if somebody does, we can show that that was an intrusion that was not allowed by carelessness. Of course, we can avoid the risk altogether. We don't get involved in it. That's that thing about before, we're walking away from it. And I'm not interested in this. We can decide to insure ourselves against the risk. Mean setting money aside to carry over, setting money aside to ameliorate the risk. We set this money aside, the risk occurs, we have the money to pay for it. Or we can buy insurance, which is usually a little bit less expensive in the long run. Some of that's tax deductible, etc. Not going to go into this slide. This is the lot of damage that we've had, different things, tornadoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, etc. Not going to talk a lot about that. Self-insurance we just talked about. We've decided that it's cost effective for us to set aside a certain number of operating dollars to take care of that risk. And that's what we're going to do. And notice what, if you want to compare and contrast this, what Ford did. Ford did not self-insure against that risk. Ford said, okay, it's better for us to pay out the indemnity than it is to do the difference here in paying for that risk. We could self-insure by having this $6 O-ring, I think it's what it was, $5.95, installed on all of our Pintos, and then we won't have to worry about that risk, or at least the risk will be greatly reduced. And we decided, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to pay the claims that come in. Notice what it says here: the companies that self-insure do what's known as going bare. And so they've set aside X number of dollars to say that there's a risk, and they think it would cost them $100,000. So they took $100,000 out of their operating costs and said, okay, if we have these, this is what we're going to pay. Now, what happens if they exceed $100,000? Well, there is no more. And now they're going to have to pay it out of something else. So they don't have those funds set aside. So it's really a problem. And that's where we have insurance companies that come in. Now, here are uninsurable risks. No insurance company will take this on, at least none in the United States. Lloyd's of London was known for years of taking on risks that other people wouldn't, or at least that was the claim. I don't know how true it was. I never had a policy with Lloyd's of London or did any business with them. I don't think they do that any longer. Nobody will insure you for market risk. Now, let me give you an example of this. A few years ago, the Procter & Gamble stock went down precipitously. And so that really affected a number of retirees from Procter & Gamble who had their IRAs or whatever tied up in Procter & Gamble stock. As long as Procter & Gamble stock was up and dividends were good, they were in pretty good shape. Once those went down, the dividends went down, they weren't in very good shape. And so they went to court and sued. And, you know, I don't remember who all was sued, whether it was the board of trustees, not board of trustees, the board of directors, or exactly who they sued. But the court said, no, wait a minute. You can't sue people for what's going to happen in the market. So that's what that's talking about. Political risk. Well, we probably don't have that in this country because we have pretty stable government. I probably should not use the word pretty. I should just use the word stable. But it would be in other parts of the world where you maybe have some money invested in a country, and the country had big time problems. Change the government, whatever. You lost all your money. Nobody's going to insure you against that. Now, personal risk and operational risk also fall into that same category. Here's what risks are insurable. The policyholder has to have a risk that's insurable. Automobiles is an insurable risk. Your home is an insurable risk, or apartment. So that sometimes there is renter insurance. There must be a way for the insurance company to measure the loss, and not only loss must be measurable, and then the loss must be measurable, and the chance of loss must be measurable. I kind of was not paying attention to what I should be saying here. So it's not only the loss that's measurable, and we know that you have an automobile accident, it's X number of dollars. But the chance of that has to be measurable. What's the chance of you having an automobile accident? Notice the next one. The loss has to be an accident. It cannot be from your malfeasance. Now, yeah, okay, you had an accident in a car and let's say you were on a road that was icy or whatever and you had an accident. Okay, you were behind a wheel, you were competent, you weren't impaired, you had an accident because the road was bad. Now, somebody could make a case that you shouldn't have been out anyway. But let's say you were out and you didn't have a chance to get off the road, and trying to get off the road, you had the accident. Is that accidental? Yes, it is. Even though you probably shouldn't have been out in the first place. It's accidental. Insurance company is going to disperse its risk across as many places as it can. So it's not going to hold the entire risk. It's going to hold some of the risk, and it's going to filter it out, pass it out to as many people as possible. And then the insurance company can tell you whether or not it'll take your risk. Now, for instance, many states, if you are charged with a moving violation or sometime, you get points on your license. And some insurance companies, some well-established insurance companies, will say, if you have 6 points or more, we're going to do one of two things. We're either going to drop your insurance policy. Now, most places, if you get 12 points, you lose your license. We're either going to drop your policy, or we're going to increase your insurance premium by an exorbitant amount. Now, I'm not going to tell you it's an exorbitant amount, but that's what it's going to wind up being. I'm not going to use that word exorbitant. They're going to make you pay a penalty for being a bad driver. And that penalty many times maybe is double what you are paying. Maybe it's even more than that. Or like I say, they'll take the other way out and they'll drop you. Now, these are different insurance policies. We all know a good deal about them. That's a contract. Remember, that's a contract. It's written by the issuing company, insurance company, and the policyholder is the person who signs it, and he or she agrees to pay a premium for the coverage. And you know, if it's an automobile, it's usually for a year. Many people pay that semi-annually, twice a year. My wife and I do. We pay our car insurance twice a year, and it's usually about the same amount of money. You might pay a little bit extra. If you pay it monthly, you're going to pay a lot extra because there's the paperwork that's involved and a few other things. A lot of states won't let you do that. They'll tell you that you have to pay it this thing. A lot of states also, you have to have a valid insurance policy to renew your automobile license, not your maybe even your driver's license. I don't know, but I know when I go to register my car for the next year, I have to show them that I have insurance. Premium, again, that's what you pay. A claim is what you give to the insurance company for some damage that's occurred to the piece of property that is being insured. These are the basics of insurance policy. The first there is the law of large numbers. The insurance company tries to sell as many like-type policies, I'm using that term, like-type policies, to as many people as possible to lessen the load of their payout. And when they have a larger number of people, then they can spread the risk out over a wide amount of territory. If you want to know, that territory here would be individuals who own policies. And so this is beneficial to them because they have prediction models that tell them how many claims they're going to have to pay out over a period of time. people with having the same type of policy. And the more people they have underwritten, they have their policies, the less amount they're going to have to pay out. Now, are they still going to pay if you have your car's damaged and it's $4,000 claim? They're still going to pay $4,000. The answer to that is yes. That's not going to change any. But what is going to change is it's going to cost them more at $4,000. It's going to be costlier to them if they only have 100 policyholders as opposed to having 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 or 200,000 or $250,000, whatever it happens to be. The amount of money paid out is not going to change, but the amount of money they have coming in is going to change. So it's going to make that $4,000 payout a smaller percentage by having greater number of people. And then the indemnity says you can't collect more than what the actual loss is. Simple as that. Two types of insurance companies: a stock insurance company and a mutual company. Stock company is just like any company that sells stock. The people that own the stock are the owners. A mutual company, on the other hand, is owned by its policyholders. I can't tell you one is better than the other. Many people believe the mutual company is better. I don't know that to be a fact. What I would tell you is enter into some kind of contract that's going to give you the biggest benefit for the amount of money that you're paying in. Do a little shopping around. These are just different types of company. A stock company is like Metropolitan. Everybody knows a mutual insurance company, Massachusetts Mutual, or New York Life. I'm not going to talk a lot about healthcare changes. I used to be able to talk a lot more about that than I can now, but the Affordable Care Act has changed a lot. And I don't mean that to be negative or positive. I mean it to be exactly what I say. The insurance premium, healthcare insurance premium business has changed. It is changing as we speak. And what I can tell you is to find something that does for you what you want it to do. And again, do some shopping around. We have in the United States let me change this around a little bit. We in the United States spend a greater proportion of our income and government subsidies and a few other things on health care insurance, and we don't have any more appreciable benefit than other countries that spend substantially less. Now, I'm not talking about a third world country or a developing country. I'm talking about developed countries. That's as European countries, perhaps some South American countries, and perhaps some countries in Asia. So we have a big problem here. I worked for a small nonprofit for a number of years, and I won't tell you I negotiated the health insurance contract every year, but I was part of it. And I don't remember a year in the 7 years that I worked for them until I decided to leave, that our insurance premium did not go up by double digits. That was from 1998 to 2005. It was just horrifying. So these are various types of things: health maintenance organization, preferred provider, health savings account, health maintenance, full range of healthcare benefits. You kind of get to choose a doctor of your own physician, although it is restricted, as it says on the end, but usually you find it's fairly open-ended. Preferred provider, contract with hospitals, physicians, usually pay some or all the bill, and you can choose your own physician. Health savings account, these are tax deferred accounts set up through your employer. I can tell you that these things are good to look at, and again, do some cost comparison before you enter into any kind of agreement. Disability insurance helps you out if you're disabled. Exactly what it says: you're unable to work Workers' compensation is not something that you have to pay into. That's paid into by your employer. If you're injured on the job, then that will help take care of your medical expenses and perhaps some other things. This talks about lifestyle changes here. Get the most out of your insurance. Maintain a healthy lifestyle. That's the best thing to say. I'm not going to get into eaches on that. Make sure you have a good company, reliable. Again, do some research. Too often, however, we're restricted in states as to the number of healthcare plans we can choose from. There are only 2 or 3 providers per state, so do your best to make sure it's going to be what you want and where you want it. Liability insurance. This is usually for people who are professionals. We are a litigious society, and we tend to sue at the drop of a hat. And so sometimes that's pretty important, especially for people like physicians and lawyers and things of that nature. Product liability is the same thing, except this is against the product and not for a particular person. Home-based businesses, you have to be careful about this if you have one. But most of the time, your homeowner's insurance will not pay for business-related insurance problems. Check with your homeowner's insurance, see if they carry it. Sometimes they will by adding a rider. Sometimes they'll say, no, you have to get it someplace else. Just make sure you find out. Get the right coverage. And that's just getting in here to what I've talked about. Don't buy more coverage than what's necessary. Make sure you watch small claims, because if you can pay those out of pocket, it may be a business expense. You could take it off on your tax. Make sure you find out. Talk to your lawyer or tax accountant before you do something like that. But make sure you think about that. And then also look at your home and look at the home history. If you have an older home, usually you're going to have some issues. It's 5:39. Let's take a 5-minute break to 5:44. We'll come back and probably spend about another 25 minutes, and then we'll conclude this. So please come back at 5:44. Thank you. That's 5:44. We're back for the last probably 20 to 25 minutes. We're going to discuss Chapter D, Bonus Chapter D, Managing Personal Finances. I'm going to outline the 6 steps to controlling your assets, explain how to build a financial base, including investing in real estate, saving money, and managing credit. Explain how buying the appropriate insurance can protect your financial base, and then outline a strategy for retiring with enough money to last a lifetime. I'm not sure about that. I know what it says here. I don't know that we are able to do that. And the reason I say that is because our society, our world changes on a daily basis. And what we talk about today may not be good in the future. But what I can say to you is this, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. Start a savings plan today, even if it is a small amount of money. I realize that putting money in a bank or a savings loan or even a credit union doesn't pay you a lot of money in interest. Credit union probably pays the best, then followed by savings and loan, then a traditional bank. Find something that pays you well to keep your money there. Difficult to do. There are places around. Just make sure that you get into it that it is insured either by the FDIC or the Savings and Loan Association or the National Credit Union. We talked about those a couple of chapters ago. And this talks about the difference between, the slide here talks about the difference between a person who has a 2-year college degree and a person who has a 4-year degree, and how much the difference that they will earn. I know that wages have still been stagnant for a long period of time. They seem to be rising a little bit, but it doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't think about continuing your education and completing it. And certainly if it suits you to look to further your education by pursuing a master's degree in a field that you can excel in. Of course, that's ameliorated by the fact of don't take on more debt than what you have to. This slide has a lot of good things for it, but I'm going to pick out just one to tell you, and that is to prepare a budget. Know where your money goes and have an idea of what you're going to spend. Now, I will also tell you that doesn't mean that upon occasion you can't make changes in your budget and that you can't say, oh, well, okay, this month I'm going to do something a little bit different. You can do that. But you have to remember that each time you do that, you need to pull yourself back and get back in your budget. So live within your limits. And then usually you can have some money to do a few things that you want to do after that. Preparing a budget is just the best thing you can do. And then, of course, it talks about a savings plan, which I just talked about a couple minutes ago. And then notice it says here, borrow only to buy assets that increase in value. Now, for a long period of time, we said that home ownership was the greatest thing in the world since sliced bread and the safety pin because price of homes always went up. That's not true. Probably wasn't true when it was said, and certainly wasn't true when we went through this horrible real estate bubble that we started in 2007. Some people are still underwater. So you have to be careful about that. Don't buy anything that you cannot afford to pay. You shouldn't be paying more than a third of your income in either rent or mortgage a month, and preferably less if you can. So you need to look at those types of things. Here's just talked about your budget, and you have to remember something. The budget is based upon a holistic figure. So in other words, if your monthly budget, you have to pay out, let's say $500 a month in rent and utilities and your groceries, and then you own a car, your car, and then insurance on the car. So whatever it costs you to run the car and insurance on the car. Now that's $500 isn't going to change, and so you can't say, well, a car only cost me this much amount of money or that amount of money, or I can get something else because it only cost me this amount of money or that amount of money. No. Everything has to be gone. It has to be put together. Everything has to be budgeted together. And it's not just, well, it's only $50 here or only $75 here. No. It's everything is together. So whatever your costs are, whatever you have to pay out a month has to be figured total, not eaches. It has to be figured total. That $500 I use, it's just the way it has to be. And so you have to go with that amount of money. It's $500. It isn't something different. Okay? So do that. And that covers everything that you have in here. And the last thing that you have to look at is other expenses. Those are things that come up unexpected. And they're going to bite you in the ankle or in the knee or someplace else you don't want to be bitten. And you have to have some kind of a cushion for that if at all possible. This is just a notional slide. It says, well, if I cut back on some things, how much can I save? You can see this in figure D1 on page D4 in your text. And it's just an idea. I mean, what don't I have to use today? I can do someplace else. I mean, think about, do you really have to have a Starbucks latte? Maybe you do. I don't know. I don't drink coffee any longer. But think about those things. And, could I go to someplace else and get the same thing for less money? So those are all things that you need to think about. What's my alternative? This slide just talks about how money grows. Unfortunately, we no longer, for the most part, have passbooks, bank accounts, savings accounts that pay as high as 2%. There are some that might. The people that I bank with, my wife and I have accounts with 3 different banks, and none of them pay as high as 2%. One of them pays close to 1%, but nobody pays that. The problem with that is that you need to have some money around to pay your bills, so you have to put it someplace. So think about those things. You might be able to do that. Watch out for CDs that talk about all these kinds of high interest rates, but then you have to have your money tied up for a certain period of time. So you have to be careful about that. I'm not saying you don't want to consider that. What I'm saying is that you have to consider it. And if you're going to get a CD and it's going to pay you 2.5% over 5 years, that means that you have the amount of money you put in that bank for 5 years. And if you want to get that 2%, 2.5%, after 5 years, you can't take that money out. So you have to think about it. Can I leave that $1,000 in there for 5 years at 2.5% income? You're probably better off trying to go to the stock market or something else. Now, a lot of people don't like to be in the stock market. I understand that. So you have to look at what your income is, how much you want to save, how much you're trying to get out of it, what's your long-term risk and short-term risk. What you can accept, how much risk you can accept. And if you can accept risk, well, then you think about it. Stock market might be a thing to do. If you're older, you probably don't want to do the stock market. You want to do something else, or you want to get into investments that are relatively safe. uh, these are budget cuts, things that you could do. Cut out cable television. I don't know most people could do that. It's very difficult today just to get the local commercial stations, and if you do, your reception is not very good. I could probably do that because I don't watch a lot of television. I would miss the sports that I like to watch, but even then, I don't watch that much sports or as much as I used to, I suppose. So think about things that you can do. But what I want to say with this list is, do not penalize yourself. That's the worst thing in the world to do. You have to have some part of your life where you're going to do things that aren't regimented, that you want to do, that you're going to have some enjoyment out of. Don't cut everything out. Cut out the things that you can do without, and those things that you can do without them. Those things that you can't do without, don't do without them, but manage them in a certain way that it's not costing you more than what's necessary. This is just a notional slide. I'm not even going to go there. That's just, most of us don't think in those lines, and so it's something to see, but I don't tend to talk about that. This talks about, the first thing says live frugally, but that does not mean to say that you can't spend money. What it means to say is live within your budget, allowing within your budget some time for enjoyment. It does say something that's very good and sound advice. If you're married, do your best to live on one of the spouse's salaries. If you can do that and you can invest the other, you're well ahead. Or if you can invest a percentage of it, you're well ahead. Look for what used to be called a starter home, where you could get in with a small down payment and not a large monthly mortgage, and then hopefully over a period of time that home would increase in value. And remember what I said before, I'm not contradicting myself. What I said was, the old saw was that home property always went up. I said that's not true, probably never was. But that doesn't mean it can't go up. So look at it, but you have to stop and think about something else about investment. You get into a home, you have to put some repairs into a home, you have to put some things you want into a home, et cetera, et cetera. And so the things that you do, like maybe putting in hardwood floors, I'm only using something, I'm not telling you to do that, wall-to-wall carpeting, something of that nature, upgrade plumbing, upgrade electricity, or whatever. Those are investments that you're making in the house that you hope when it comes time to sell that you'll get back out of the house. Painting the house, keeping it in good shape, things of that nature. But you have to remember that the improvements that you put into the house today, you're not going to be able to get out of the house for however many years. And by the way, if you do buy a house as an investment, you need to live in a house a minimum of 3 years before you can even get your original investment back. Don't live beyond your means. That's true no matter whether you're buying a house or something else. Look at the first list here about frugality. Don't give up something that you like. I'm going to not use the word love because love is used, should only be used for people. But you might want to extend that to pets, but not certainly not to something that's not something like that. Find something that you like to do that is less costly. It's very simple to do that. It might take you a little bit of time to figure it out, but you can do that. Notice what this other one is. It talks about not shopping without understanding what you're going to buy. Now, I like to use the term, somebody's going to hit me over the head with this, because I don't mean to be demeaning genders. But what I have found over a period of time is that women are shoppers and men are buyers. Now, what do I mean by that? Women go to shop sometimes, and there are men that do the same thing too, but by and large, I'm making generalities, but they tend to hold. Women like to shop because it's an experience for them. And most men don't like to shop, and therefore before they pardon me, go into a store, They have an idea what they want to buy, and as soon as they find what they want to buy, they make the purchase and walk out. So that doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't comparison shop. And you can comparison shop without getting out of your house today by going on the internet, sometimes to the newspaper and a few other things. And then always, try to find the best deal you can possibly find, because it's only going to help you out. It's going to help you out in the wallet. And a lot of times it's going to help you out because you're buying a better product. Remember, one thing that we too often do in this country, we tend to buy on price. And you have to remember that you only get what you pay for. You don't get any more than that. And so sometimes you're better off, maybe all the time you're better off, buying a product that's a little bit higher price because it's going to last a heck of a lot longer. If you're going to buy a home, you should think of the home as an investment, as we've talked about before. Think about it long term, not short term. And a lot of people are in the business of buying a home, fixing it up, staying there the minimum 3 or 4 years, and then selling it and moving on, hopefully for a profit. If you're buying a home because it has a mortgage, it's going to force you to save money. There's any question about it. And hopefully that money it's going to cost you, it's going to force you to save, you'll invest and get some return on besides the house. Remember that the interest you pay on your mortgage is tax deductible. Some people will say that's the a middle class, what I want to say here, middle class food stamp plan, because it's the middle class that wants that off on their tax at the end of every year. And some talk about doing away with that, but it's never gotten any traction. And then last thing about your home is make sure it's in the right place. It's the right place. It's priced right for you. So that puts you in the right location that you want to be. It has good schools. It's in a good community. All sorts of things. That's what that location is talking about. This talks about how much home can you afford. If your income is $30,000 a year, your monthly, this is what your monthly payment is, and then at how much you're going to pay out over a period of time. Be careful about getting into the stock market. Don't get into the stock market. Well, let me take that back. Don't buy a stock simply because everybody else is buying stock. Stocks don't go up forever. Just like home property doesn't go up forever. And so just because somebody is buying a stock and it's going on the way up, don't think that's the time to get in. You need to really do a lot of investigating stock before you get into the stock market. Anytime you may want to check with mutual funds that we talked about back at chapter 20, I think it was. Maybe it's chapter 19. I don't remember. Remember about credit cards. Be careful about using them. We have to remember, if you don't, and a lot of us don't think about it this way. When you use your credit card, you're actually getting a loan. The credit card company is loaning you the money to pay for the dinner you just had. And let's say it was $50. So the credit card company loaned you $50 today, and they're going to send you a bill, and then the bill used to be I'll give you a lot more time than it does today. They're going to send you a bill, and you're going to have to pay that bill in 2 weeks, let's say, from today. And if you don't pay the bill within 2 weeks, you're going to get charged interest. Now, in most cases, that interest rate is a minimum of 18%. I've talked about credit cards before. I'm not going to do that again, but remember, when you use a credit card, you're getting a loan. I had a friend of mine said that whenever he wanted to get a loan, he would go to the bank, and he was talking about a small town bank. He was from a small town, and he would tell the banker, I want to buy some money. And what's it going to cost me to buy the money I want to buy? Same thing with a credit card. So here you are. Just I'm not going to go into this particular slide. Just gives you an idea what it is, and you can go from there. This is the Credit Card Act of 2009. It gives you some protection for what you're doing, and then how you borrow, etc. And it limits the amount that you are responsible for if the credit card is stolen. This is our credit card debt. Again, a slide I'm not going to spend any time on. You know, I don't think we can talk too much about this credit card bill that we talked about before. Pay your bills on time. And don't shift balances. It's not a false promise something somebody gives you, but when you have to pay the piper, that's when you don't realize what's happened to you about transferring balances, etc. Don't apply for too many credit cards. Keep them in good state. Pay your bill because it affects your credit. You can insure your life. There's a number of ways to insure your life. Do not get into life insurance simply because somebody tells you it's a savings plan. Yes, you can save money with them over a long period of time and perhaps cash the policy in when you're 65 or whatever it happens to be. Your return's not going to be that great. It won't be bad, but it's not going to be that great. And look at the policies you want to buy. Many times the best insurance to buy is what the first one up here is called term insurance, where you can get a lot of insurance if you're younger for a small amount of money and only carry it out for so many years, and not buy things like whole life insurance or variable life insurance. Now, when I'm saying this, please do not think I am downing the insurance business. I've owned insurance policies for many years. And I've done some changing around, et cetera, et cetera. Find out what's best for you. Do not buy more than what you need. Buy what you have to have, what'll cover you. If you're a younger person, as I said, you have a small family, et cetera, buy term insurance. You can get a lot of insurance coverage for a small amount of money. Yes, the term says it's going to last 15 years or 20 years. At that time, your financial situation should be better. You can reconsider. Your children will be grown and out of the house. So think about what's best for you, not what's best for the insurance company. Purchasing annuities, these are some things that are good because they will give you a payment over a period of time. Maybe could be monthly, could be quarterly, could be semi-annually, could be annual. And you can get them for a fixed period of time or for variable, depending upon how you want to do that. Again, talk to somebody with some knowledge. Buy what's right for you, for your particular place in life, where you are, your income, etc. Not projected income that you have today. Disability insurance, we talked about that before. Homeowners insurance, we've talked about that. An umbrella policy will cover a myriad of things, your house, your car, etc. And sometimes it's less costly. So think about what it is that you want, how you want to, what's best for you. That's the primary thing. What's best for me? Is it going to take you a little bit of time to figure this out? Absolutely. But you're going to be better satisfied than just buying something that an insurance salesman says is a good idea for you. I'm not downing insurance people. You know, they have a living to make. But you need to make sure that you're buying what you need and not what somebody else thinks you need. That's probably the best way to put it. Who pays for health care? We know that this is changing, and again, I'm not going to spend too much time on that because the market is changing, and we don't know what to say about it. Health savings accounts. The best thing I can tell you about a health savings account, we talked about this a little bit before, is to find out if your your employer offers such a thing, and if they do, think about it, because for the most part, what you pay for there, what you buy there, is tax deferred. In other words, yeah, that's going to come off the top. Okay, so it's going to come off of what you earn, and you're not going to pay tax on it. It'll be deducted on your gross and not your take home. Social Security, we know what that is. You and I pay 6.2% of our salary, our wages, and our employer matches that with another 6.2%. Originally designed as old age insurance and old age survivors and disability insurance. Let me get that right. It's up there, and I should have said that. That's what the FICA is. You get that, that you pay that, whether you're being paid weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, however you're paid. The Social Security Trust Fund is probably in a little bit of trouble. I think we can look for some changes to Social Security as we go forward. How much change, I don't know. The problem is that we have politicians talk at each other, not to each other. If we want to figure this out and fix it, we need to sit down and talk and be reasonable about it. Unfortunately, people aren't reasonable. Individual retirement account, that's tax deferred. And what that simply means is you do not pay tax on that money that is accrued until you begin to take it out. Now you have to start withdrawing from an individual retirement account at the age of 70 and a half. You don't have a choice in that matter. Now, if you have a Roth IRA, and I don't know how popular these are today, you don't ever pay tax on that. And you're not required to take it out at a certain amount of time. You don't have to be 70 and a half. But a 403B or a 401k or an IRA, they're all the same, similar type things. You have to begin taking out at age 70 and a half. Roth IRAs down here at the bottom talks about how you grow that. Tax-free, growing, tax-free when it comes out. My wife and I converted to a Roth some years ago, and we had to pay the money for that because we had a traditional IRA, so we had to pay the difference. But we more than made that up now. Tax deferred contributions is exactly what that says. You do not pay tax on that until your money comes out, until withdrawal. 401k plan, pretty much the same as what we talked about over individual retirement account, except 401ks normally through your company. Well, it is through your company. Works the same way as tax deferred IRA does, and you can set aside whatever you want to set aside pre-tax dollars, as it says here. In many cases, companies will match up to a certain percentage. And this is just the benefits. We've talked about this. Your contributions reduce your taxable income right now because it's taken off the top. So if you get $1,000 and you put in $100, you're only taxed on $900. You're not taxed on that extra $100. And then you're not taxed again until you start withdrawing, usually at age 65, or like I said, you have to at 70 and a half, and you should be in a lower tax bracket. And what is here, I mentioned just before. A Kehoe plan is very similar, except these are for people who are self-employed. Works the same way. And again, it can be withdrawn a lump sum, just like an IRA can be, or spread out over a period of years. This is talking about wills and executors and things like that. If you're going to have a will, and I suggest that you do, go to a lawyer and have a will drawn up. Yes, it's going to cost you some money, but you're better off. And then look at it occasionally over a period of time and see if things have changed. And you need to change the will, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you can change a will on your own by simply signing a document, getting it witnessed, and attaching it to the will. You don't have to go back to the lawyer. Now, I have both of our daughters are lawyers, but I'm not working against them. What I'm saying is you can change it yourself. I'm not going to tell you don't go to get legal advice. Sometimes it's the best thing to do, but you can make an addendum to that, known as a codicil. yourself. And then executor is the person that you name to carry out the wishes that you have in the will. And that brings us to the end of our bonus chapters. It is the conclusion of our series of lectures. I hope that you've gotten something out of these. I'll have this uploaded for you tomorrow. I thank you for your attention in this course. Please let me know what you liked about it. Please let me know what you think can be changed or should be changed. As I always say to students, you may want to do that after your grade has been recorded. It wouldn't make any difference to me, but probably going to feel better that way. So think about that. So thank you for your attention, and good night.